Melissa Bruning, welcome inside the Crazy Ant Farm. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I'm ready to get crazy.
What we like to do at the very beginning is have our guests introduce themselves to the listeners. You are a costume designer, so was that something you always wanted to do or just kind of fall into it? I actually saw in a previous interview you started thinking about this career path at the age of 8.
Yeah, I was an odd kid, but not in a bad way. But I was lucky. I was raised by artists,
Mhm.
and my dad is a sculptor, my mom was a painter, and they're both educators also, and I like the three-dimensional quality of costume design,
Mhm.
and specifically. I thought for sure I was Broadway bound. And for a long
Ah.
time, I did theater. I did sets and costumes in high school. I have a BFA in technical theater, which basically means like sets and costumes. And I
Right.
did sets and lights and all that kind of stuff. And then I went and got a master's in costume design from NYU. So it was pretty much like junior high, like, I like theater. I like clothes. I like to make things. I could sew. And then it just sort of like kept defining into more of a path. And
Mhm.
then by the time I got to New York, I I had worked on a lot of off Broadway and some like Broadway tryouts, and it was the 90s, and film, we didn't study film in school. It was sort of there because it was NYU Film School was
Mhm. Right.
next to us, but we were like, we're doing theater. So we didn't really dabble in it much. And it was the kind of indie heyday where anybody who could find $1 million or $500,000 scrapped together a film.
That's right.
So somebody called me and they're like, hey, do you want to work on this film? And I was like, yeah, okay. And I found out that I loved it. I loved how immediate it was. It
Yes.
was my fear for myself was that I was going to end up doing West Side Story in Ohio, which, I love West Side Story and I love Ohio, but it wasn't the career path that I was wanting to
Right.
do. And to be a Broadway designer, I mean, you're a Broadway designer till you die.
Yeah.
So, like, Willa Kim was still designing on Broadway in her 80s. And I was like, there's
Wow.
no room. There's just, unless you somehow find like that niche in, I just didn't feel like there was room for me. But I
Hmm.
love film and I felt like there was room for me in film.
See, and I feel like no matter what position, right, on a film, I feel like once you're a part of it, once you're on board, that magic and there's like no other feeling like that, right? It's just like, whoa, I want to be here. I want to do this. I think it's just an unmatched parallel when people get on and they're like, wow.
It's visual storytelling. I mean,
Yeah.
what I was trained to do, part of our the master's program at NYU, you had to present a project. They were like, okay, we're doing Chekhov Seagull, but you had to approach it as a director,
Mm.
as this is sort of the idea I'm coming from. Like, I
Mhm.
want to do it all in black and white. Or I want to do it very realistic, but this happens at times. Or, you kind of come to the project with your own ideas. And I feel like that has helped me a lot in film
Mm.
because I'm actually able to work. Film directors don't always come from a visual artist identity.
Mhm.
And I feel like I'm able to give them that artistic component of like, if we do all the colors desaturated here, but we push it, scale it up in this section, it's going to give you an extra emphasis in that area. And it's a language that I take from theater, but I
Mhm.
feel like it's helpful to directors in mainstream films also.
Ooh.
No, that's a very interesting way to
Very,
look at it because
very.
like we told you before we started recording, you're our first ever costume designer. So like speaking of the latest project you did, Space Jam: A New Legacy, I can imagine with the final sequence, the whole basketball game being shot in the dark, did you have to navigate that challenge in some sort of way, maybe bring out the brightness of more colors?
We definitely did. In fact, I didn't even know it was being shot in the dark till we did a camera test.
Oh,
And I was
wow.
like, oh, wow. Because you're so used to stadiums being so bright.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's in a kids movie. I was like, oh, it's going to be bright and cheery and
Right.
very, like stadium like. And it was not that at all. And so, which is why you do camera tests
Mhm.
and
Definitely.
visual tests so that everybody's on the same page. But what we realized too, because I was testing different colors of uniforms, and what I realized was that the lights that they were using for Space Night
Mhm.
were desaturating the colors that
Oh,
I was
wow.
using in uniforms. So I had to go back and punch everything up and make it much more vivid, mainly so that it didn't gray out.
Mhm. Interesting.
Which is, but then it shows up on products and stuff like that, also extremely graphic and visual, which I
Mhm.
feel like works for the piece.
Mhm.
But, a lot of what I do is defined by the lighting on the set. So it's defined by the actors, what they want to wear, how they wear it, what fits them, who they are. It's defined by the lighting because the lighting creates a three-dimensionality to it. So if the costume is really working, it works well under the lights too.
Right. So, do you work in close relation with the gaffer then? Do you have conversations back and forth like after he's done what he's doing with the director and they figure out how it's going to be lit and what the plan is? And I mean, do you have conversation back and forth saying, okay, here's the lighting scheme, so I need to know this, this, and this, so that when your process begins, and I guess that's another question for anybody out there listening, when does your process begin? Are you brought in at what point during pre-production do you start to come in and do your work?
First off, I'm usually informed by the DP, director of
Okay.
photography, about how he's going to light it.
Okay.
And also the production designer of they usually do visuals of the sets
Right.
of how they're going to be lit.
Mhm.
There was also in this concept art of what it should look like when they light it on stage.
Mhm.
So for me, I don't necessarily talk to them specifically, although when we do camera tests and we look at the footage, that's when we say, oh, I need to bump this up. I need to take
Gotcha.
this down. Especially like in the Planet of the Apes movies, I had to see the level of distressing, right? So, the scenes at night, I needed to punch up the distressing so
Mhm.
that it didn't clean up too much. But if it was a daylight scene, then you didn't want to see too much texturizing. And it's kind of the same way with Space Jam, where, I had to find out how they were lighting it. And then
Right.
also because it was a lot of motion capture work with the tunes and working with animation, I had to check with them to see how they were going to approach that piece of it. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of production meetings, but I like to pride myself on that. I feel like I have enough experience that when somebody shows me those visuals, I can give them what they need.
Very interesting, very interesting. And I'm glad you brought up Planet of the Apes too, because that was going into my next question. With it being a lot of motion capture with Planet of the Apes and with the new Space Jam movie, does that bring a new hurdle to jump over, or is it kind of just another thing to throw in the book and just go down the original process?
I think it was helpful for me because I was one of the few people on the project in the beginning who had any motion capture experience.
Okay.
So when you're doing motion capture, we have to have these motion capture suits that we
Mhm.
have made. And so I have a close relationship with the visual effects department because their needs are always changing. So even just during the Apes movies, the outfits evolved. And
Right.
then I've had motion capture on two of the Apes movies, on Rampage with Dwayne Johnson and also on Space Jam. So I also know a lot of the performers. And when they were starting to do some of the practice for the game,
Mhm.
they had basketball players that they auditioned and came in to help play the different parts of the goons. But the tunes
cool.
requires somebody who is more whimsical
Mhm.
and gymnastic. And so Terry Notary, who I'd worked with on a couple of on the Apes movies and then also on Rampage, I was like, you should talk to Terry, because he knows all those guys that can
Right.
flip up down and do loony stuff. And so, when you're working on production, I like to think that I'm also I'm a helping the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah.
People that I know, people that I've worked with, that I feel like will help make everything better. I can say, hey, you should call Terry.
Right.
And they did.
And that's what it's all about, right? It's about the best possible product, the finished product. And if there's a better way, if there's a better person, if there's a better idea, right? You shouldn't be afraid to say, this is what we should do. And I love that you brought that up, because we talk about that all the time. It's a collaborative effort. Filmmaking is a collaborative effort, and you can't have an ego. You've got to be able to listen as well as tell. And so I love that. I love that you brought that up. And also, I'm very interested, because you talked about camera testing and all the different things, but and that you've been at it for a while. So I'm really curious, the transition from film to digital and kind of that whole process over the last few decades, right? And the whole computer era of previs, right? Do you find that that's, I mean, because now they can light the whole thing right there on the computer, and they can see how it's going to play out and what it's going to look like before they ever set up a light. So do you find that whole process easier now? Does that make your job easier, more difficult, or do you just approach it a different way with that?
I love a previs. I mean, it tells me the director's intention, right? And
Right.
so I'm not going to waste time on this group of background if I know it's a foreground shot
Mm.
for most of it. Or if the concentration is going to be, in a tight or a medium, I'm not going to stress out about the level of the shoes being right,
Right.
if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
if there's a shoe shot, well, thank God I know. You know what I mean? Like it's like you'll look at something sometimes and be like, or wait, who's that guy over there that he's interacting with? Oh yeah, he's kind of background, but I think we're going to cast a stunt. I'm like, well, for me, this is a major player,
Mhm.
even though he's not on paperwork, not probably doesn't have a name.
Right.
But for me, I know he's interacting with my lead
Mm.
or my second. So he's important. He's part of a storytelling component. And so I know this costume is going to be next to this costume. And sometimes you get a list of stunt performers and you're like, oh, they're just going to fall off a building in the back. But if they're involved in more of a way towards the front of camera, you know that you have to take special care with that. Yeah. And it's not even like going to the mall and just picking out clothes. Like
Right.
there's an actual art of filmmaking that as a costume designer, I feel like I bring a level of knowledge to everybody else of like, well, I can give you this.
Mhm.
Or if we do it this way, I'm going to make sure that when you have your composition of visual composition, I'm going to make sure it all looks like a painting,
Right.
that nothing's going to jump out too much, that nothing's going to recede too much, so that they get that beautiful visual picture.
Right. And I mean, what was it like? Because Warner Brothers, Warner Media is such a legendary film studio in Hollywood, and they definitely like touched on each one of their big franchises in this film, which I thought was absolutely amazing, like with Casablanca and Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, all of it.
Yeah.
What was that like? Did you just kind of get to open up a whole big like wardrobe thing and pick out certain selections from different franchises on the Warner Brothers lot, or like did they have that specifically in mind?
Well, it starts with the script, right? So if
Uh-huh.
there's something specifically called for, our problem with this, it takes a long time to clear things through legal.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we didn't, it was kind of a moving target. So we
Mhm.
knew we might be doing this costume, we might be doing that costume,
Oh wow.
but if it didn't legally clear, then we couldn't do it.
Mm.
So, we got to a point where we would start to build, like I would go to the line producer and say, I need to start now. If I don't start building this costume, it won't be ready for shooting.
Right.
But we don't have permission to actually build it yet.
Mm.
And so with the line producer, we talk about which is money well spent, right? Do you spend the 10 grand to build the costume and maybe it ends up on the cutting room floor,
Mhm.
or do you screw up your schedule because the costume's not ready and you can't shoot it when you
Right.
need to?
Right.
So it's all sort of a variable of, what do you need ready by what day?
Mhm.
And at the scene, spoiler, when they're at the game and we have all the sort of Warner Brother characters
Yeah.
there. I mean, that was 3 months of clearing characters.
Oh,
Wow.
And
wow.
Yeah.
starting to build, like, I basically went through the whole catalog, and at first it started with just villains, and I was like, okay, we're not going to have enough villains,
Right.
because like there's one villain in the movie and then like everybody else is good. So
Mhm.
and then I would just make a list and start submitting it to clearance, and I get every couple days I would get paperwork back from them saying this estate says no. This
Damn.
they're thinking about it, but it can't be in a film that has alcohol or drugs.
Right.
Fine. This one, and you had to, so each film had to have a different layer of clearance
Mm.
Wow.
before we get to presenting to the director. These are the characters I can clear for you. So I had a thick, like 3-inch binder of the picture of the character and the film it was from and what our level of clearance was on it.
Wow.
And as we would go through, once something got okayed, we move it to a different one so that the shop could start building it. But we
So-
got to a point where, Harry Potter is not clearing yet. JK hasn't
Right.
said yes or no. So we had to just go ahead and build it, hope for the best. So the last week of shooting the background, Voldemort finally got pushed out there to be in the crowd because we didn't have permission before that.
Right. So a couple of questions through all that. Because what you brought up is a very good point though. When you talk about the line producer, and thankfully a lot of our listeners know what a line producer is. So when you talk about that though, like you said, it's a balancing act, right? Because either do we spend the money here to make the costume and then it's never seen, or do we mess up the schedule? Either or is going to cost money.
Yeah.
You're gonna lose money either way, right? So that balancing act. So I love that. And then I guess when you were talking about all of the clearances and the different things like that, Logan, you brought up a good point of all the legacy films, right? And all the different Warner Brothers films, but there's also the original Space Jam. And they are very particular about the original Space Jam. And so what was that process like to have to come in and go, okay, I want to do all of this, but I can't do this because we don't want to trample on the original Space Jam. And so what was your approach to kind of like update it, I guess, and kind of give it a whole new fresh look, but similar to the original because it is homage, it is the same. So how do you make something different but the same?
I mean, I think you have to rely on your director, right? Like,
Right.
what does your director want? What's important to him? What year are you setting this? So for me, I knew it was going to come out. I knew it was going to come out in 2021, even though we're shooting in 2019. And so for the modern day dress stuff, I was looking at just contemporary, if you go up the food chain of fashion, you look at the high fashion and what's going to start trickling down. So you look at the colors, you look at the textures, you get the expensive designers because they're sort of at the forefront of it. And I wanted to make sure that, it felt, it's like a fine line. You want it to feel contemporary, but you also want it to feel timeless. So you don't want anything that's so disturbing to the eye that you're not going to be able to concentrate. In the original Space Jam, I think that he wore a polo for it, which is a very like timeless kind of look.
Right.
And so we also were I was like, okay, let's look at bomber jackets or styles that don't have a specific collar. The colors I tried to keep very in the Looney Tunes family,
Yeah.
saturated and bright. And I used brands that were expensive because they're a rich family. I want that to come through.
Right.
And so, you just sort of play around with that. When you get to recreating things like Casablanca or Mad Max or what else? Matrix, that it's a given. That is what it is. So the challenge is how do you create that for somebody who's like 6'9"?
Right.
How do you translate scale?
Right.
Which is a different sort of thing. And luckily, my education in because of my master's, because I have actually made a lot of costumes. I had to take tailoring, and I had to take hat making, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like fabrics and fabrication is a real strong skill of mine that I have. So the characters at the Space Jam game were for me. I was like, yeah. Let's do it. Let's, Wicked Witch of the West, check.
Right.
And I would have assistants come in. I had just 2, I think, completely just fabric assistants that would come in with fabric swatches every day for me to look through, to pick, to buy, to make those costumes out of.
Wow.
Oh, that's so interesting to hear. And I mean, I'm just curious about this too. Is it all a beforehand thing, or do you actually have to make some stuff on set? I mean, do you get into a bind sometimes where you have to make at least a certain kind of costume on set?
At this level, you shouldn't.
Right. Right. You should not.
But it's too much at stake, right?
Yeah.
So, and you have a lot of what's the word for it? You have a lot of like markers you have to check. So
Right.
you have to do a fitting with the actor has to like it. And then you present those pictures to the director, and then the director picks what they like. And then the studio looks at it and they say what they like. And so you have several stages that you go to before the costume is ready. And then the costumes have to go to a trailer. They have to get ready so that they're steamed out and ready and in an actor's trailer at 4 a.m.
Right.
So you can't really, I've been on indies where it's like, oh wait, we're going to call this guy up and he needs to look dirty. And I'm like, okay, crap, we're going to.
Okay. Yeah.
And I luckily don't have to do that kind of stuff as much anymore, because it's very it's hard to sleep.
Yeah, I can imagine.
If every day you're going to be thrown a curveball and like, oh God, do I have this?
Right. Like those nightmare scenarios where you're on an indie film and they're supposed to get bloody and they realize we've got to do another take and you only had one shirt. Wait, what? Yeah, like that type stuff, right?
I mean, I did back in the day, I did a movie called Club Dread with the Broken Lizard guys that I did Super Troopers with. And we were in Mexico. And they literally were so behind on shooting that I had like a number of clothes for some of those bloody moments.
Right.
But I didn't have enough to have because you've got your lead, you've got the pre, you've got the post, you've got all these different levels. Well, they brought in a whole team of stunt people to be these people.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't have enough clothes for that. And so everybody got one, and then we'd have to wash it out. And
oh my goodness.
It was nightmarish. And none of them existed anymore because we'd been shooting in Mexico for 3 months.
Right.
Nobody else on my crew spoke English except for one girl. And I didn't speak Spanish. I took French in school. So that didn't help. So it's like those kinds of things. Like, thank God, I feel like I'm at a place in my career where, I don't have as much of that. But we did on Space Jam. There was Don Cheadle's character was supposed to be a motion capture suit. He was not going to be in clothes. And we'd ask at every meeting, so is Dawn going to be in clothes? Are we going to do LG in clothes?
Right.
No, digital effect, all digital. Well, then the day came of like, you know what? He's so great. We should probably have him in the film as himself, and we'll just augment it. And I was like, okay. He shoots in 3 days, and I have nothing.
Oh my goodness.
For this man. Like, we all looked at each other and we're like, oh my God. Like, heart, when your heart starts to be like, oh God, we're going to be in an earthquake. It's and we suffered through, and it was hairy. I'm not gonna lie. And we just kept churning things out every day because one costume became, I think we probably had 30 costumes.
Oh, wow.
I mean, there's so much stuff that's not in the film. There's a whole dance sequence with backup
Okay.
dancers. Just didn't make it in, but you don't know what's going to make it in.
Right.
So
Right.
everything 100%.
Exactly. And I mean, speaking of Don Cheadle's costumes, I have to say I'm from Indiana, diehard Hoosier fan, so I love that little notion about Bobby Knight. I bet a lot of people did not catch that, but I was cracking up in the theater when everybody else was like, "What is he laughing about?" But yes.
I know. There's so much inside basketball in this film. Like, if you're a real basketball player and into it, there's like all these gestures, there's game time, there's all this stuff that is so layered that I feel what's great about this film is, my kids liked it and they're 4 and 7, and that's great. Check. But friends of mine that are older are like, yeah, I liked it because I'm into basketball and I knew all the inside stuff. Or other people are like, well, I just like LeBron, or I just what somebody would do with it, or I'm a huge Don Cheadle fan.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's got a lot for everybody.
Agreed. And I mean, you've gotten a chance to dress like a whole bunch of amazing actors and talent in Hollywood. I mean, The Rock, Val Kilmer, Christopher Walken, LeBron James, Don Cheadle. The list goes on and on. Reese Witherspoon. Yeah, who would you say was your favorite or your favorite costume that you got to put on these magnificent people?
That's a hard one.
Right.
I mean, as far as like dressing somebody and kind of living with them through the movie, Reese definitely. I mean, she's an awesome person, and just to know that I could support her in this role. And when I was doing the film, I was also pregnant with my son.
Oh, wow.
So she would be like, "Don't you go out there. Don't go out there. I look great. Just send Lindsay." And I was like, "Are you sure I can walk out there?" And it said, no. I did it. She was like, "I had to work through all my pregnancies and it sucks, But so, like, as a person who I adore and as a performer that I felt like just nailed it, and just knowing, like, 90s clothes are not attractive.
Right.
So we really, we did our best. I got to work with Cheryl, whose story it was. And so it was a very personal project in that way.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that means a lot. But I mean, I've been very lucky to work with very talented people. I love Dwayne. He's great. I love LeBron. He's great. These are professionals and they treat me like a professional. And I hope that I like to think that what I can do that's best for them is to make them feel comfortable, that they feel like that character, that they can forget about what they're wearing, that they can just be who that person is. And I think through my work in theater that, like, I'm used to working with actors to develop, like, oh, I need this scarf is going to help me be this person.
Right.
So I feel like I want to unhamper them from the clothes. I don't want them thinking about, do I look good in this or not? I just want them to feel right.
See, well, and I think you did really, really well with Wild. Like, if you were like, oh, 90s clothes and all that, because that movie inspired so many people. That character inspired so many people. And I got to tell you, when everybody decided to take that journey and go hiking and do that, and they start posting all their pictures everywhere, they all looked like Reese. So I think they were all emulating your guy. It's like, well, if that's how you dress, then that's how we dress. So,
yeah, exactly.
Well done.
My flannel and my boots. And
that's right. That's right. So, okay. So first of all, thank you so much, because I really feel like a lot of people out there just think that, like you said at the top of the interview, costume designers run out and buy some clothes and bring it into the set and that's what they wear. So to have this conversation and get it out there about what really goes on and the process and everything is just fantastic. And what we normally do near the end is to have you pass along some advice and things like that. But what I think would be really cool is kind of, for anybody out there that maybe is sketching some designs, right? And wants to, and kind of, what is the process? How does one go from sketching some designs with dreams of being in the movies? Where do you start? How do you get in? What's the path? Because I feel like a lot of people have no clue, right? They know acting's easy, right? You got to go audition. But how do you do costume design?
I mean, I think that you should go to school for it. I think that it is a trade that you are helped by knowing what you are doing, by knowing the history of what's behind it,
Mhm.
by doing character analysis in classes. You do Chekhov and okay, this is the climate of the country that this play is in.
Mhm.
This is the temperature. This is the season. This is who this woman is. She wears this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I think that, everything I do is character development. It's all about who this person in life is
Mhm.
and history and context. And I think that if you learn that in school, then you can learn that on the job. I just talked to a bunch of NYU graduates, and my advice to them was find the biggest film that you can get on and be a PA in the costume department.
That's
And
right.
just don't set yourself up to fail. Just be there to observe and watch. And I know the money sucks, but eventually you will get there. And there's going to be tricks that you will learn at a higher level, and you're going to get more exposure to different types of filmmaking
Mhm.
with all the bells and whistles than you do on independent films. But you do that, you watch, you learn, and then you do your own independent film. And you
That's right.
take what you've learned and you take the people who you like and the people who will do favors for you because you've been so good doing these bigger things, that then you can design your own stuff.
Mm.
And I think, I did a lot of going back and forth. I'd work on something big and then I do my own piece.
Mhm.
And you learn, it's twofold. You learn through the big stuff and you learn through the small stuff.
Right.
And if you can do the small films, you can certainly do the big films.
No, that's so good.
Love that.
That's so good. I mean, all these up and coming artists are just gonna absolutely love this one. We appreciate you so much again. I mean, from the
Of
bottom of our
course.
hearts. Anytime you ever want to come back on, there's a lot
Yeah.
more stuff that we would like to talk about with
I
you. So
know.
like anytime, like this was a blast.
Absolutely.
But it's all about social media now. So where can people follow you?
They can go to my Instagram, Melissa Bruning, and I post updates. And luckily I'm getting out there. I'm doing some interviews because I believe in costume design, and I think it's
Yes.
important for people to understand that it's an art form.
Yes.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Well, listen, take care. Thank you so much yet again. We appreciate it so much. And you have just a great rest of the evening, and we'll be talking to you
Thank
soon.
you.
Of course.
All
Of
right.
course.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. That was absolutely amazing.
I mean, I love when we do below the line individuals because that's where it's at.
Yeah.
That is what without those people, and you know who we're talking about, the people that you don't sit in and watch at the end, right?
Yeah.
Right? The list of people. Nothing happens without them. And to hear the process, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
That was intense.
Yeah.
What goes into something that a lot of people think is just a simple thing.
Exactly.
And it is not a simple thing. And I love the whole approach it as a director. It's a very visual medium, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I learned so much. Like, honestly, I wouldn't even thought. But the more she talked about going to school, we talk about all the time. When it comes to acting and or directing or writing, you don't necessarily need school for it. But when it comes to something like costume design and like making connections in school,
Yeah.
I feel like that is very important. That's a very important niche to go to school for, because there's so many different fabrics, there's so many different like types of designs that you should probably be learning before you even step foot on a film set. So just to get that information and put that out there to the world, I think is very important.
Exactly. And then life experience, because she was talking about experience. You need to know this character and that character, and it's all about character development. And the biggest thing, guys, see, it doesn't matter whether you're an actor, a director, everything above the line in front of the camera, right? Or you're below the line and you're designing costumes and everything. What did she say? Get on a set.
Yep.
That is invaluable experience where you learn the most. Get on a set. So that's the trend from every guest we ever talk to. So if you're listening, get on a set.
Agreed, man. Agreed. Melissa was just absolutely phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
Oh, man. Thank you again, Melissa, for coming on the show.